theater in my high school and in the community theater. So it wasn't, it was pretty typical, I think.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You hear a lot of stories like that. I was even thinking about your story of there of your parents taking you to see your grandfather, Scared Straight. And I know they used to have this show on A&E, right, years ago. And it was
Yeah.
so interesting because I actually did a program like that. I was on probation when I was in high school at 16 for getting in some trouble. And part of the probation deal was this Scared Straight program. So your probation officer took like a group of us, and I was living in North Carolina at the time, and took us into to the state prison there. And we sat around a table with people, and I mean, it was people, all kinds of serious stuff. And they brought us and showed us the death row and, all this. They had the different jumpsuits. And it was pretty, like, probably traumatic looking back on it. But that was the
Yeah.
idea, right? As to where you go. And it's so interesting, though, that you bring that up. And when I look back at that situation and other things, when I was younger, I easily just talked myself out of it. Yeah, I mean, this is great and all, but this will never be, I'll never end up. I mean, I come from a great home and, middle class, a nice neighborhood, nice parents. I'm not like excelling in all areas of my life, but come on, this can never be me. And the fast forward of my story, it was me. But I think, yeah, those interventions our parents try and to get us into stuff. And I did a lot of counseling growing up too, but I mean, what I learned through counseling and therapy through the years is you really have to know what you're doing when you go in there, and you really have to be like interested and really plugged into it. And when you're a teenager and my parents like go here and do this, it's like, all right, we want them off our back a little bit, right? But it's really hard to plug in.
Right. Yeah, I remember the counselor saying, "What can you do to switch, flip in your head? What can you do besides drink, besides party?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, maybe swim." We had a pool in our backyard. I like to swim, but it was like just giving them an answer so they get off your back. Like, I was not plugged in. It was just going through the motions. And yeah, there was nothing, the Scared Straight. Like, for me, he was an old man. I didn't even really connect the dots that this is what could happen with alcohol.
Yeah,
So
very
it
true.
didn't really scare me.
Yeah. So you're really plugged into doing theater, you said, right?
Yeah, it was a great outlet for me. I was a shy kid growing up, and once I started, there's something called forensics, which is a speech competition, not the DNA science. And once I started doing that and doing it in front of people and getting some success with it, and then trying out for plays, and it felt really great to me to be in that position. And moving forward, after I graduated from high school, I didn't know you could do that for a living. And I decided that maybe that's something I want to look into. The colleges that I applied to, all state schools, but one had a really great Bachelor of Fine Arts program in musical theater. I took voice lessons at the time. I did the whole 9 yards, and I said, all right, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to study theater in college. And my parents were fine with it. A lot of parents would say, no, you're not. I'm going to pay money for you to study accounting because then you can get a good job. My parents were fine with it. They were so supportive, and I was super blessed in that way. So I entered this state school in Wisconsin and immediately found my people. Theater people are a very special group. I had theater friends in high school as well. I had jock friends, I had theater friends. I like straddled different friend groups. It was great. In college, it was even better. And they were like me. They were outgoing and fun and silly. And guess what? They could party like crazy. Theater people can party. I mean, for every show, there's a cast party, right? Every show. And there are themes, there are Halloweens, there are, dress up. Theater people love a good theme party. It was, 4.5 years. It took me 4.5 years to graduate, but it was a great time, and I still have super good friends from those years. And when it came time to graduate, it's okay, I have a theater degree. Now what do I do? And to me, in my head, I always thought Chicago's a decent-sized city with a theater program, and maybe I'll move there. It seemed realistic. I got cast in a show right after graduation, a dinner theater production of the show Gypsy, and we played in Ohio and then Wisconsin, two different dinner theaters. And the first day of rehearsal in Ohio, I was standing around the piano learning my part, and this very charismatic, good-looking, suave man approached me and said, he looked me up and down and said, "How tall are you?" And I said, "I'm 5'11" and I wear heels as often as possible. And his name was T. Scott, and that was day one of the most incredible friendships of my life. We were thick as thieves. He had a role in the show, dancing, singing, just lit the stage on fire every single night. And we grew, we bonded immediately throughout that run. And he liked to drink too, and I could drink, and Thursday nights were our nights. While we were putting on the show, we would record in a VCR. For those of you listening, you know what a VCR is? It's very old. We would record Friends and Seinfeld. That was like the Thursday night lineup. And after the show, we would watch it. We would go to the grocery store. This was in Ohio, and they have a beer called Cutie Delight. They sold a 15-pack for $4.99. And that was our jam. We got that 15-pack, and we watched our shows, and we finished it. The two of us. That's a lot of beer. We bonded over stuff like that. I mean, we bonded over more, but drinking was always in our lives. It was sophisticated, it was fun, we had parties. And at the end of the run of that show, he said to me, he got cast out of New York. He was based in New York, and I got cast out of college, and he said to me, "Do you ever think about moving to New York?" And I was like, "Of course I do, but how does that even happen?" And he said, "If you want to give this acting thing a try, you really got to move to New York." So I said, "Okay." And I packed my bags and bought a one-way ticket. And on July 5th of 1995, I moved to New York. And we came into Newark Airport. We took a bus into the city, Port Authority. I'll never forget this. We were loaded with suitcases. We probably had about 8 suitcases between us. And we were only going to go like 4 blocks from Port Authority. We had a sublet for 2 weeks. We got to the steps of Port Authority, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Okay, take down your hair, walk down to the street, hail a taxi. Tell them we're not going very far, but we'll give them a big tip." And it was on. Like, assignment number 1, New York, here I come. I took down my hair. It was like blonde, flowing, gorgeous. I'm 23 years old, tall, thin, just the whole 9 yards. Walked down, scared as shit. Walked down, hail a taxi. It worked. He took us with all our bags. T. Scott knew I would have more of a chance of getting a taxi than he would. And that was my foray into living in New York. And I had a place to stay for a couple weeks, and my boy T. Scott got cast in a show almost right away, and he left. And I know he was nervous to leave me, but I made it happen. I got a job on a local dinner cruise ship that I was a singing waitress, and was able to start making money while still auditioning. And he got on the road, and he went on the road with a big national tour, and that was thrilling for him. Of course, I missed him, but he would have me out often. This was like the first time you get a national tour, you're making bucks because you're not paying for rent. And he would have me out to visit often, and usually led to lots of parties. He was a gay man, so there were gay bars galore. So we had fun on the road together. And he was gone for a while. From there, he went on cruise ships to Greece, and just made quite a life for himself. And I carried on in New York, trying to get established and doing my thing.
Yeah, wow, quite the journey. So you started in New York. I'm just curious to see what did your folks think about when you're like, I'm headed to New York.
They had never been to New York,
Mhm.
right? And here their 23-year-old daughter says, I'm going to New York. My dad, I will tell you, my dad, when I graduated from college, I told them within 5 years I would like to be in New York. And he leaned over and said to me, I hope it's sooner. So he was excited. My mom was very nervous, and she got on a plane probably 3 months after I moved there to, and she stayed in my crappy apartment and just needed to see what was going on in New York. And my dad eventually, that was the first time my dad was ever on an airplane, when he flew to New York to visit me. So it was out of their comfort zone for sure. But they were supportive. They knew something I wanted to do, something I dreamt about. And yeah, and I'm still here today, 29 years later.
Yeah. And so you get this job doing, so you're a singing waitress?
Yeah.
What kind of songs did you, what kind of songs did
Well,
you sing?
it was the kind of thing where you wait tables, right? It's a buffet style, you wait tables, and then you hear the music, and it's a little review, maybe a 20-minute review, a medley of different songs, basic dancing. And so you're on stage singing a little stage, but your tables that you're waiting on are right there in front of you. And the best would be people raising their hands. I never got my dessert when you're mid song. Or can I have more coffee? I'm like, dude, I'm a little busy right now. It was a great job for me in New York. I still have my core group of friends that I started with on that job. That is my family, not my friends that are my family. And we had a place after work, Wilson's on 23rd Street, where we went and spent our tip money on pitchers of beer. And we were young, we could do that. We could get up in the morning and go do a lunch shift if we needed to. Drinking in New York at that time, yeah, it was a thing for me, but it wasn't a regular thing because I didn't have any money. I was looking for change in the couch to get to ride the subway back then. Or I would walk. Of course, I was spending tip money on beer, which is a whole other situation, but priorities, right?
Yeah, I can relate to you with that as well. I mean, when you're younger, a night out, sometimes looks a little bit better than the rent coming next week or the week after. So
Yeah.
where do you go from there? And I mean, out throughout this time, you mentioned Wilson's there. You guys are, doing that thing, and I think
Yeah.
that's too. You hear that story quite often. The community that comes along with, working, whether it be restaurants or, entertainment, and just the shifts too, right? Like I remember working in restaurants, and you might work till 10 or 11, 12 o'clock at night, and you had maybe a different schedule than a lot of other people, maybe sleep in the morning. But we always used to go. I mean, we used to go out probably not every night because we were in a little bit of the same spot. Funds are tight, but we would often make it work. If somebody was short, we would cover. But we had that community to where it was almost like you were a sense of belonging. And I struggled with that for so many years in my life personally, coming up to that. And then when I started in this restaurant business, I was like, hey, we're hanging out with older people. It was really cool. And it wasn't disastrous at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't. But those drinks show up during a shift. Any kind of hospitality job, it's like, oh, okay, it's the end of my shift. Bartender's gonna slide me one. That's cool. But the boat, it was seasonal. So in the wintertime, I had to do something else. And I eventually got a job at Rockefeller Center in a restaurant down there where the ice skating rink is. And I happened to live a block away at the time. I couldn't have been closer. And I took this job that I had to be there at 6 in the morning for breakfast and lunch. People like Al Roker are coming in for breakfast. Conan O'Brien loves a tall blonde, let me tell you. And it was great because it kept me on track. I knew I had to get up early. I could have the afternoon to go to the gym or to go to an audition, and it kept me in a really great place physically and mentally. And that's where I met my husband, John. He was a manager that would come in at noon for the lunch and evening shift. So our paths crossed a little bit, and through a little flirting here and there, he actually picked up a payphone one day and left a message on my answering machine asking me out on a date. So we hit it off right away, and he was in the process of trying to figure out what he was doing. He moved back to Florida for a little bit. I booked a national tour that took me out on the road for a little while, so we were apart. But eventually we did both end up back in New York, and we got married in October of '99, and it'll be 25 years, which I can't even hardly believe. Wow. Yeah. So we started our life together, and drinking was, it was something we did on occasion. It wasn't a huge thing. He's never been a huge drinker. He's the kind of guy that could have a glass of wine. For me, even when drinking wasn't like a huge part of my daily living, when it was there, it was always something that I could not moderate. There was never 1 or 2 glasses for me. Early on, from the time I took the first drink, maybe when I was 15 years old, that was just the way that I drank. And this memory came to me recently. We were at a Yankees game. This is years ago, before we started our family. And there was a group of guys behind us. And one of the guys, they were all drinking, and I remember the one, he said, there was this one guy that wasn't drinking, and they said, come on, why aren't you drinking? We're all drinking, why aren't you? And I remember he said, because I can't have just one. And I remember hearing that, and I remember thinking, oh my God, that is me. That's me. I've never heard it put that way before. So it was a part of our lives. We would take wine tasting classes, and we took a trip to Napa, and once wine started creeping into my life, it became something that I liked and something that I looked forward to. We had our children, my kids are now 21 and 17, and when they were little, it wasn't really possible to be a heavy drinker because the demands of that. I was a stay-at-home mom. He was working crazy hours to get to the point where we are now, where he doesn't have to. And the drinking really wasn't too much of an issue until my kids got to be middle school years and got to be more independent, and I could kick back and drink a little more. And then I was enjoying white wine and not too much vodka yet, but at one point, around 2010 at a class reunion, I had flavored vodka for the first time. That was about when that was getting really popular, and I thought, wow, this is pretty good. Of course, it was not good the next day. Yeah, as we raised our family, things started to become more stressful. Teenagers are stressful. My daughter had a point in her life where her mental health was playing a role that was really hard to deal with, and it caused me to start drinking more. And I would go into my doctor and have some visits where I'd see my liver enzymes would be up, and my doctor would say, take 3 weeks off from drinking, come back, and we'll retest. And that was probably around 2016, 2017, when that first occurrence started happening.
Yeah. Well, and what's that like? They do the blood work, and then they mention to you, like, hey, this is a little bit, are you drinking too much or anything? Like, they ask a question like that, and then we're like, oh, no, definitely not. Or
They do, yeah. And I remember saying, no, I don't think I'm drinking any more than the next guy. But your liver enzymes don't lie. If they're elevated, there's usually a reason. As my kids grew older, and really, 2018, 2019, this sober curious started playing in my head. Like, I started hearing about it, I bought that book, this Sober Curious, and I thought, this is really interesting, this term. And it was worth getting for lack of a better word, curious about. Because in the back of my head, I always thought, this is probably not something you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life. I really did. My uncle, my dad's brother, during that time died from alcoholism, my grandpa's son. He was 47 years old and had a son. And, little things like that started creeping into my head as I got older. And in about 2018, 2019, I started reading more and thinking about it. And I got into the 1 Year No Beer, those guys. Heard a podcast with Andy Ramage and Rich Roll. Podcasts weren't what they are now, 5-6 years ago. And I got the book. It was a 28-day break from alcohol. And I read it and I was like, I'm going to do this. I'd get 7 days. No, get maybe 17 days. It was hard. And in 2019, the fall of 2019, I was upstate at our cabin, and I was up late watching a football game. I am from Wisconsin. I do bleed green and gold, just a side note. And I was up late watching this game. I went back and looked at my notes from when I was a part of that community. I drank 2 bottles of wine and 2 big vodka lemonades. And I woke up the next morning feeling like death had warmed over. And I looked at myself, and I was puffy and bloated, and I looked like shit. I took a selfie, and I said, that's it. That has got to be it. I cannot do this anymore. And I leaned into that community as much as I could, which really wasn't a community. It was like a Facebook group and daily emails and videos. But I read a ton of quit lit. I didn't even know what the term quit lit was. I read a ton of books. I started exercising, walking at least, and I felt great for 4 months. Oh my God. And then on March 12th, 2020, exactly 4 months of me being alcohol-free, New York City became the epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was crazy. School was getting canceled. My daughter's national track meet was canceled. I mean, you remember the NCAA basketball tournament, and all of a sudden at halftime, they're saying, everyone go home. Like, what the hell? So in my head, I was like, this warrants a drink, definitely. And I said to my husband, we were going out that night, I said, I think I'm gonna have a beer. And he said, yeah, okay, have a beer. And then he said, do you think you can have just one? And I said, yeah. And that night I did have just one. And maybe a few more days went by and I didn't have any. And I don't even remember when I actually went out and bought wine, but I did. And before you know it, my refrigerator and our wine cupboard was full again, and it started ramping up. At this time, I had been working with an older senior lady as her caregiver, and we had just started right before this pandemic happens. Here I was, so happy to be like out in the workforce again. I'd stayed at home with my kids for so long, and this happens, and she's got to go upstate with her family because her building locks down. It was just, it sucked. It sucked so much. Eventually, I got busy making cloth face masks because one day my husband said, hey, the CDC says we're going to have to all be wearing masks. And I have a sewing machine in my closet, and I had those skills, and I had some extra fabric, and I was like light bulb moment. This could be fun. And I went to YouTube and looked up some, and I just started doing this and sending them to friends and family, especially like sport themed. Oh my God, who doesn't like to wear, right? You would have worn your hockey team across your face.
Yeah.
I know you would have. Yeah, I got started going with that, and then I was like, what if I try to sell these things? And I did, and I was hustling and grinding and feeling really good in that part of my life. And then it turned into, damn, I've been sewing for 6 to 8 hours today. I'm ready to open up some wine. 5 o'clock, ding, let's go. Sitting down, relaxing, that was my jam. And so then it became a reward. And it just came in. It came in with a vengeance. Because even if I was feeling like shit the next day, I could still. It was my own schedule. I could sit at my sewing machine for 2 hours if I want. I could not at all. And it became a way to deal with everything going on. And in 2021, my friend T. Scott at this point had moved to Ohio. He was always such a big part of my life. He was the man of honor in my wedding and saw both my babies' first days in the world. And when 2021 came about, in the summer of 2021, we got a call. John's mom, my mother-in-law, woke up one day and she couldn't feel her legs. And they took her to the hospital and she had a massive tumor wrapped around her spine, cancerous tumor. Earlier in that year, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. They caught it very early on. She went through everything. She had clear scans, and this just came on out of the blue so aggressively. And she was gone 10 days later. We lost her. 10 days. Everyone in the family had bought their airline tickets to go down and see her and say goodbye, and it ended up being her memorial. And that was the first time in our relationship that something that big and drastic, and just the loss of her, because she was larger than life. She really was. She was the matriarch. She was just an incredible lady. And yeah, it was a huge loss. And to see my husband struggle with that was really hard. He threw himself into work, and I used wine and Tito's vodka, to deal with that. It was around this same time that my friend T. Scott, who had been struggling on and off with drinking. I saw him in 2018 and 2019, and both of those times, one time he had a busted up shoulder. I didn't know at the time, I know now, he had fallen. Liver failure and liver disease, and the writing was on the wall for him. And it was, oh God, it was so hard for me to wrap my head around that, because I knew he had an issue, but I didn't know it was to the point where he was going to lose his life. And so I thought, he's not going to have a long life, but he's still here, and maybe there's a way that he can turn it around, maybe getting sober. He did get sober. It was just too late. By the time he got that diagnosis, it was too late. So in April of 2022, he went into the hospital to have the fluid drained from his body, which is something you have to do when your kidneys and your liver are not combating this disease. He was also HIV positive, so there just wasn't a chance to filter all that out. And he went into the hospital, and he had pneumonia and sepsis, and he never came out.
When was the last time you saw him? Did you see him through this?
The last time I saw him was May of 2019, because that pandemic happened, and even though we were getting the go-ahead to visit people, and he was in Ohio, and he was working with a gay men's health organization that was setting him up with housing, and he was really trying to get his life together, and he would talk about me coming out there to visit, and I was just like, just say the word, buddy, I'm ready, I'm here for you. And what's so sad is that he would say, I just want to get better before you come visit. I just want to get better. And he was on a transplant list and everything. He was vocalizing to me. We spoke all the time. He was telling me that his body was failing, his body was shutting down. But he was also so optimistic that he might get a transplant that would save him in time. Now, in my head, I knew that even if that were to come through, I don't think he would have survived. That was a big loss for me. It was my mother-in-law and then my best friend, and his light, oh my God, it shone so brightly, and then it was gone. And I felt completely gutted. I wasn't sure how to operate. And even while he was dying in the hospital, even before he got to the hospital, in my head I thought, maybe this is like the thing that does it for you. Maybe it's gonna take losing your best friend to something like alcohol for you to say, what are you doing, Melissa? I thought about visiting him when he was in the hospital on a respirator for a week before he passed. And I thought about visiting him just for my own selfish reasons to see what a dying person with this disease looks like. I did not go see him because I know he wouldn't have wanted me to see him like that. So in my head, he will always be how I last remembered him, as we were on vacation in Florida celebrating a friend's 50th birthday together. Anyway, I threw myself into feeling like I could just do anything I want with my life after he passed. And I remember in the kitchen one night, it was just I made dinner, and I don't remember what it was, but it was not good at all. I was trying to go through the most. I broke down. I said, I just can't. Can we order a pizza? And he said, yeah, of course we can. Let's order 10 pizza. Let's order Chinese food. Let's order tacos. Let's order a fucking shitload of desserts, because that's what I want. Oh, and let's wash it down with lots of wine. And that's what I did. And I started getting that voice in my head started to grow louder and louder about, man, this is not working. I was waking up in the morning feeling like, what if I didn't get out of bed today? I've never had those feelings in my life. I watched friends